G'day guys, today I want to talk to you about using ultra wide angle zooms in your real estate photography and the inevitable distortion they introduce that you're going to have to deal with. Okay, now I want to talk about our first image here. As you can see, it's a kitchen shot. So you've got some elements that are close to the lens. So we've got this bench in the foreground here, which is nice and close to the lens. Plus you have elements which are close to the edge of the frame. So you've got this clock here, you've got these jars here, the stools here, and over here you've got fridge and cupboards which are close to the edge of the frame. Plus you've got this bench down here which is not only close to the front of the lens, but it's also close to the bottom edge of the frame. Now when you first start shooting real estate photography, there's always a temptation with your wide angle zoom lens just to go as wide as you can. And you're going to get real estate agents ask you to shoot as wide as you can, make it look as big as you can. But there are obvious issues with going wide, and that is the inherent distortion you get when you use ultra wide angle lenses. And that distortion in relation to from the center of the frame to the edge of the frame. So what happens is you get stretching. So the frame actually stretches as you go wider. The central part of the frame gets smaller, so the detail in the center of the frame actually gets smaller in relation to the detail around the edges of the frame. And that's the issue when you're using ultra wide angle lenses. Now if you're using an ultra wide angle lens for a landscape and you want to exaggerate the foreground, it's a great thing. It's a great tool. You could put some rocks in the foreground. Say if you did this vertically, you would put some rocks or flowers or something like that in the foreground, and that would look larger compared to say mountains or sky or sea or ocean or something like that in the background. When you take that ultra wide angle zoom lens and you bring it into your real estate photography and you start shooting interiors like this, when you go wide, you're going to start stretching your scenes, and everything on the outside edge of your scene is going to appear larger in relation to items or details on the inside, the middle of your frames. Okay, so this particular scene here, I shot this first at 18mm. So with my camera, I've come in close to this bench. I've got my fridge just on the left there. I didn't want to see the whole fridge, just the edge of the fridge, so people could see where the fridge placement was in the kitchen. So I've come in close with my Nikon 14-24 set at 18mm, which is not very wide. Now you would think with ultra wide distortion that you'd really have to worry about 16mm, 15mm, 14mm, 12mm. But the reality is anything under 24mm is going to produce distortion. Even 24mm itself produces distortion. So in reality, I guess anything under 50 to 35mm range, which is a standard kind of range, is going to produce some kind of distortion in your images. And the wider you go, the worse it gets. And when you get down to your sub 20mm range, every millimeter makes a big difference. So you would think probably at first that 18mm is actually quite tame in comparison to say 15, 14mm, etc. But the reality is even 18mm distorts the image quite considerably. So if I go to the next image, which was shot at 24mm, where are we? There we go. So this is 24mm. And as you can see now, the edges of the frame are far more natural in shape, and the proportions of the center of the frame to the edge of the frame is far more normal. I'll go backwards. That's 18mm. You can see now the clock is distorted into an oval. The front bench here is stretched, and in relation to the rear bench, it's far, far bigger. Far bigger. Look at this tiny little bit of bench there compared to this massive, massive amount of bench here. So the proportions of the center of the frame to the edges of the frame is far more distorted. We go 24mm. Now you can see this bench now is nowhere near as stretched. Okay. The stools, they're stretched there, and they're less stretched there. You can see the clock's more round, even though the clock is actually still oval. Believe it or not, the clock is still a slight oval shape, but it is not as dramatic as that. Okay. So what I've done with this shot is I've moved the camera backwards in the scene. Now behind this behind this scene where I'm shooting from, there's a dining room with a whole bunch of open space. So I've brought my camera back about a meter, I think about a meter and a half, and I've zoomed back in to 24mm so I can get approximately the same scene. So the same amount of fridge, the same amount of clock. If I go back, I'll show you. So roughly the same, okay? Although I've got a little bit more because you can see this pot plant now. But you can see the difference straight away between 24mm and 18mm. And this brings up an important issue with lens choices. When people start shooting real estate photography, they naturally assume they need the biggest, widest, ultra-wide zoom they can possibly get their hands on. And that's not necessarily true. Having a wide-angle zoom is absolutely necessary for real estate photography. You can't do real estate photography without a wide-angle zoom in your kit, an ultra-wide-angle zoom in your kit. Because just remember, everything under 24mm is actually classified as ultra-wide. Okay, so wide angle is 24 to 50, and ultra wide is kind of your 10mm up to 24mm range. That's ultra wide. Now, even though you have a 16 to 35 or a 14 to 24 or 11 to 24 or whatever the lens it is, even though you've got this, this awesome ultra wide angle lens and you can go as wide as you want, the thing about real estate photography is to do it professionally, you're always striving to shoot at the narrowest focal range you can. When I approach a room, when I walk into a room, my first thought is, how can I frame this room with my focal length as narrow as possible and not as wide as possible? So can I shoot this room at 24mm? So I start at the narrow end of my zoom and see if I can shoot it there. And then I get progressively wider until I've got the details I want. I never start the other way around. That way, I'm always trying to get that room in the best proportions possible while still showing all of the details. And looking at these two photos, this one, 24mm, and this one, 18mm, after you look at the 24mm for a while, it's actually a far better photo. It is a far better shot. People who constantly shoot at 18, 17, 16, 15mm and wider, they don't produce nice images. Yes, you're producing a big, wide image of whatever room you're shooting, but it's distorting the hell out of it. And it's ugly. Honestly, after you look at these for a while, you scroll backwards and forwards between these two, the 24mm shot is a far better shot. It just looks better. The proportions are truer to real life and it just looks nicer. It doesn't look so stretched. Remember, as you come into you're going towards the narrow end of the zoom, your 24, 28mm and up, the center of your frame is going to be correct proportions or more correct in comparison to the edges of your frame. Okay, and you can see that in these two shots quite dramatically, how it stretches the image. The center gets smaller, the edges get bigger. See that? Okay, second shot. Again, another kitchen shot. Now I've chosen two kitchen shots because kitchens often have the features in which are going to be stretched the most. Your benches and your cupboards, things that come up to the edge of the frame. A lot of the time in lounge rooms, I don't have lounges coming right to the edge of the frame. So, but in kitchens, you often do. You often have benches coming to the edge of the frame. Now this shot here, this first one, this is a shot with a 14 to 24 Nikon at 16mm. Now the agent specifically said to me with this shot, I want it to look as big as possible. And I thought, yeah, you want me to go really wide, make it look really big. But I'm going to shoot both. I'm going to shoot at 16mm to show you what it looks like, and then I'm going to shoot it straight after that at 24mm and show that. I thought to myself, I'm going to show you both of the photos and you'll see the 24 is probably better. So first, 16mm, you can see the bench is quite close to the front of the frame, so the bench is really stretched here, stretched out of proportion. The details here, the stove, the range hood, and these cupboards are much smaller than the edge of the frame over here. This stool is way bigger than the stool next to it. So even that little short distance there, you can see a massive size difference that's caused by just 16 millimeters. The cupboards here are tiny compared to the cupboards here. And when we go to the next shot at 24 mil, bang, the difference is stark. Now you're still getting smaller details here than here. So this cupboard here still looks smaller than this cupboard here. You've still got image stretching even at 24 millimeters. Okay, but it is far more acceptable image stretching than that. Okay, so the proportions out of whack, closer to normal. Okay, so these two stools here closer to normal. The bench is now no longer as stretched, and the stove and the range hook look far more prominent in this shot than they do in this one. Okay. Now this, when I showed the agent the two photos, I showed her this one first, and she looked and went, "Oh," and she wasn't really happy with the way the bench looked. Then I showed her this one. She said, "Yeah, that's the one. Use that one." Okay. Now again, these just looks nicer after you've looked at them both. You go backwards and forwards a few times. Sure, this one looks stretched and cool and kind of edgy, and it would be great for a landscape if you're trying to exaggerate lines in a landscape. This is perfect. You know, if you're trying to exaggerate a path, a road, a river, you know, any kind of line in nature, and you're trying to exaggerate it to bring your eye into the shot, it looks great. And that's totally appropriate use for wide angle, ultra wide angle zooms. But in the real estate world, what we really want is this. The buyers want to see the rooms of a house in correct proportions, or at least as correct as they can possibly get them, while showing all the details in a room. Now it's always that compromise. It's always a compromise between how much detail do I show in the room versus how stretched do I want this image to look. And if you can go back and zoom in, always step back, pull your tripod back as far as you can, and step in. Again, with this image, like the image before it, I had a dining room directly behind me, and I was able to bring the camera back about a meter, zoom into 24 millimeters. I made sure I got the details in, so the edge here and the edge here, and took the shot. Okay, you're not going to get as much ceiling. You're obviously not going to get as many lights. I didn't get the whole fridge area in here, but that's not really that necessary. You can see there's a fridge going. There's no fridge here because it's a brand new home, and it's just been styled for the sale. So with your ultra wide angle zooms, always go back as far as you can and go as narrow as you can to start with. And then you slowly go wider and wider until you get the details you want in your room. And it's always a compromise. You're always compromising between the amount of detail you want to show in a room versus the amount of distortion that you're willing to accept to show that detail. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.